Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another episode of Complex Like Wine, the podcast where we talk about complicated things and improve over time just like wine does. We have Miriam with us today, and before we get into all that, we of course have our wine. So, hi, how are you doing?
I'm great. How about you? Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you for being here, and I'm doing really well too. So what are you drinking?
Today I am drinking a local favorite. It's a Pinot Noir by Liberté. Let me see if it'll unblur for us. Oh,
Oh, there we go. There we go.
yeah.
Nice.
It is from Paso Robles, which is just in my backyard. And it says, "Forget the boundaries. The promise of the new world is reflected in the freedom of its winemaking. Emancipated from the tyranny of world bureaucracy and control, the new vintners dreams of something original. No rules to observe, no quotas to fill, nobody to serve. With its elegant red hue and finesse, this 2020, oh, it's a pandemic edition, Pinot Noir delivers an exceptional bouquet of cherries, vanilla, and rose petals, followed by opulent flavors, strawberries, and black tea. Served with spanakopita, and then it says éposier de Bourgogne cheese or lobster bisque with seafood paella. Okay,
Okay,
beautiful.
I love the description on that bottle.
Right?
Yeah. I am having a Zinfandel from a winery in Temecula. It's called Altissima. I am a member there. And so I really, if you're in Temecula, it's a great place. But I'm having a Zinfandel today.
Wonderful. I love Temecula. I grew up in San Diego.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Temecula's great.
yeah.
So before we dive in, you just came back from Spain. You were telling me briefly a little bit about it, but how, like, yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. This is my second year going there. We went to the Basque Country, to San Sebastian. It's also called Donostia in Basque. And last year, I took two of my children and we went for a wedding. I have a close friend here who married a Spaniard from there. And it's actually a really cute story. She studied abroad, years ago, probably 25 years ago now, studied abroad and met him. They had a long distance relationship after she came back to the state, tried to keep it up. Long story short, they both got married, had kids, divorced separately, and reunited in the last few years and got married last year. And they are such a sweet picture book romance. It's really an awesome companionship. So,
Wow.
yeah,
That's amazing. It just shows you when it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Like the stars will align when it's meant to be.
for sure. Yeah, but it's a beautiful region. It's warm and the people are very warm. Once 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 you're in the circle, they're very warm and sweet and inviting and wanting to help and wanting to just make your travel experience the best representation of Basque Country that they can make. So it's wonderful.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you had a great trip. Yeah, the pictures and the videos I saw on social media, they looked awesome. And it's great that you were able to go with family and all that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's kind of give some context for today's episode. So, you have your background in psychology and all that. And so, can you share a little with the podcast on how you got into it and, your career right now and all of that?
hmm So um, I went back and forth a lot, and I actually took 5 years off in between undergrad and grad school, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I always knew that I was interested in supporting people and finding their potential, in teaching them in some capacity. And I feel like I was very, um, very much a therapist from a very young age. you know, just giving other my friends advice and sort of for youth group, I would create these lessons and activities that were meant to improve self-esteem and improve self-worth and things like that. So I think I came. It was a long time coming, and I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and I didn't know I went in undeclared and wasn't sure. Went into psychology, the major, and found that it was very impacted. And there was a forced curve actually. So I was getting, A's and B's in classes, but it came out as like C's and because of the forced curve.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I don't know. It's not, I feel like this is too, like I'm getting a lot of resistance. I'm not super interested in like stats and like memorizing all these like, these DSM things. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go another way. And so I followed a path. Another love of mine is art history. So I ended up getting my BA in art history. Thankfully, I took enough undergrad psych courses for grad school, so I don't have to take very many. And I had a sort of winding road for the 5 years in between undergrad and grad school. I was a personal trainer, I was in mortgage sales, and then I kept coming back to education in some capacity. And a teacher friend of mine suggested school psych, and I went for it and I got it. And I had interviewed a few school psychologists, and I was like, these are my people. I like them. So that was sort of my journey to getting there.
Very cool. So school, like education psych and all that, what are some things that maybe had been a surprise that now you can look back where things you were not expecting within your journey and career? Or did you have going into school have a good sense of what everything would encompass and entail?
No, you know a little bit, but you don't really know the day to day in any profession. Um, I I thought I would be more of a therapist and clinical psychologist, sort of. And I guess I am that role. I mean, I think assessment is a huge part of my role, and it continues to be in the broader profession. So every 3 years, well, initially, and every 3 years, I will do an assessment for those who are receiving or are candidates for receiving special education. So um, that part is kind of in line with what I thought I was going to do, but I'm enjoying it much more than I thought I would. You know, figuring out, making a diagnosis. We call it identifying with Ed Code, but I am licensed as an educational psychologist too, so I can make a diagnosis based on the DSM. I think what was surprising is people. I got the impression that I was working, you know, exclusively with students with special needs, but I actually have a lot of access to general education. I should say all students are general education students, but those who do not receive special education in addition to general education. And there is one of the most surprising things has been the level of or the frequency of suicidal ideation at the elementary school level.
Mm. Can you explain more on that and what that means?
So, suicidal ideation refers to thoughts of suicide or harming yourself, ending your life. Um, and at the high school level, it's sort of, par for the course. You can anticipate that as what's the word? Uncomfortable or detrimental as it is. It's expected. But increasingly, we're seeing big numbers of students at the elementary school level experiencing, vocalizing, and attempting self-harm. And so the difficulty with that is that their brains are not typically their brains are not fully formed yet. The theories, the research and the theories behind cognition are that humans develop formal operations like abstract thought at around age 11. So it's right at that cusp. But I'm getting kids, as early as third grade. Well, actually, we've had kindergartners also express thoughts, pictures, vocalized, I want to kill myself. I want to die. I want to not be here. Those kinds of suicidal ideations. And then, so for every threat to self or others, we investigate. And so I would do a risk assessment. We document everything. We have a protocol and a set of questions. Basically, we're looking for, does the student have an intention, a plan, and can they carry out that plan? Mm-hmm. Those are the three main things that we're looking for. And so if they can, in fact, carry out the plan, or if they even have a plan, then we would refer out to an outside resource, outside agency. In Santa Barbara County, we have Casa Pacifica Safety. It's called, it stands for Safe Alternatives for Treatment of Youth. And they are our partners in crisis support for students. And at its very, most extreme manifestation, we are referring to safety and also, in some cases, hospitalizing students.
That's really hard. What do you think are some of the now key factors of why you're seeing so much more younger kids starting to vocalize or feel this way?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been reading up on it, and there is a correlation between the rise in smartphone use and social media use and the uptick in suicidal ideation. Now, I know we don't, if you know anything about psychology or statistics, correlation does not mean causation. So for instance, in high crime areas tend to have more churches. Okay, that doesn't mean that it's a cause and effect, mm-hmm. right? Something like it could be just like population, like more crime is related to population, and so are more churches are related to population, and so it does not indicate a direct association. But I do believe in what I've listened to and read recently. They did control for certain factors, and it still came out as associational. So I do believe that electronic use is somewhat related. I also believe that we are not teaching coping strategies and social emotional skills as readily as we have in previous generations. And I'm talking about at school and at home. So knowing how to cope with life with stress is, in my opinion, the number one skill to have as a human, as a functioning human. You can handle anything else if you know how to handle stress. Mm-hmm. And a big part of school and parenting is learning how to eat shit for periods of time, right?
Right.
Like, you're not always going to get your way. You're not always going to be able to do whatever the heck you want. And being able to tolerate that and work towards some kind of, goal or complete certain tasks and make progress, even when you don't want to, I think that's an integral skill in just being a human. And so, a lot of our a lot of the students that I'm seeing struggle to use those coping skills. And I'm not talking about anything revolutionary. I'm talking about, journaling, asking for a hug, um, like exercise, breathing, talking to a friend, or anything that dis, that dissolves, or what's the word, releases stress and allows problem solving to kick back in.
Those are really important things that you're not taught in school, and depending on your family dynamic, you're not seeing a good healthy example of how to stress manage. And it's are there with like with a school psychologist or someone's in the education field, do you know if most schools or psychologists do programs to help teach these kids, or just kind of ends up being more of when you have to do these one-on-ones with them and assessments that you're able to kind of now start educating them on ways to help manage the stress?
I think that it's a little of both. Some schools are adopting sort of like what we thought of as like the character counts kind of stuff in the old days. Now they call it social emotional learning. And there are initiatives statewide and nationwide to implement more mental health resources and social emotional resources, um, and embed it into the curriculum. So knowing how to handle stress, how to identify feelings, how to perspective take, how to cope with stressors, how to make yourself feel good, um, and just expanding on all of those. There's an organization called CASTLE. I believe it's Comprehensive something Association for the Social Emotional Learning, but they have a set of standards. It's CASEL, and they have a set of standards that that they outline for any kind of social emotional learning that is happening should be based on their research, or basically it's a clearinghouse. So they've researched everything for you and filtered it down and disseminated it so that it's more easily implemented. So there is a push in education for that. There's definitely like the one-on-ones that I do. I think for a lot of kids, it does take the one-on-one to get it to implementation on their level. Mm-hmm. I think that they don't put it together that all of these things that we've been practicing at school, I can use those at home. I can use those tools at home, or I can use them when I'm upset at school. I don't know necessarily that they know how to manage their emotions and tolerate discomfort. And so more and more, especially if their attention is being grabbed by electronics all the time, they're not going to learn things sort of like by osmosis or just by watching anymore. They need to explicitly, directly be taught. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're running up against.
So like you said earlier, to see kids struggling with this, with with suicidal thoughts and all that, it's not as surprising to see that in high school or around that age group, but it's starting to become more apparent with younger kids. From your end, is that emotionally difficult or tough for you, especially when you're dealing with such young children that are now expressing that they feel this certain type of way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely wearing. At first, you sort of get off on or at least me personally, get off on being like a kind of like a hero in crisis. I'm able to quickly de-escalate a situation, swoop in, save the day, as they say, and feel that fulfillment, like I made a difference in this child's life. But it if it's happening, a few times a week, a few times a day, it's very wearing on mental health for the mental health professional. And it's difficult. You begin to experience compassion fatigue, which is where you are feeling, too much, and then you feel nothing. And I'm seeing it a lot with my teachers as well. But you have to know how to shut it off. And especially people's home lives, when there's nothing I can't control anything about the home life. I can just make recommendations to the parents, but if they don't follow through, then there's no recourse for me unless it's a CWS worthy complaint. So that's hard. That's really hard. And even if it is a CWS worthy complaint, it's really hard to feel helpless in that respect. So I try really hard to focus on what I can control. It's been easier to let go of the mental drain of that since having children, because I just have to. Prior to kids, I would be up late at night thinking about certain students and are they okay right now, and are they getting enough to eat, are they taken care of, and things like that. But more and more, I just don't have the bandwidth, and I have to be very selective about how I prioritize my energy and my time. And part of me being there for them is getting enough sleep and recharging every evening and every weekend. And so, both for my own kids and for the students at school. So I have to make my own care a priority, my own mental health.
Would you say a lot of people in this profession struggle with that? Or do you see maybe there's a trend where, younger professionals that are now getting to this, they're having a difficult time adjusting versus people that have been doing this for a long time? They've learned ways to manage and how to separate, work from life or home balance and all that.
You know, what I see long term, and it depends on the person, of course, but the ones that care too much and are not able to put in healthy boundaries burn out and leave the profession.
Mm-hmm.
And those who, some of those who remain are able to keep things at arm's length. Some of them are just very good at coping strategies for themselves. And some of them, just don't have, they're just like completely immersed in work and love it passionately, but also don't necessarily have a lot going on family-wise or obligation-wise in their personal life.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're able to pour everything into the work. And not to say that I don't pour everything into my work, but there is a balance that has to be made so that you don't lose yourself in it.
Right. If you are cool with sharing, what does that balance look like for you in your personal experience?
Mm-hmm. I'm very committed to my job and to serving my students, but I'm also very committed to non-negotiables for me. So sleep, 7 to 8 hours of sleep is a non-negotiable for me. Exercise on a daily basis is a non-negotiable for me. Time with my family, time for journaling, meditation, or reflection, not all of those in one day, but, just some time set aside for some kind of mental practice. Nutrition, basically like what you think of as like foundational things in life. When I talk to my students about it, I say it's like, you've got to get the roots. So the roots are like sleep, food, family, time to yourself. Uh, like all of those things are sort of like you've got to have those roots and then you can grow. But if you don't have any of that, then it's just going to pull your plant is just going to pull right out of the ground, right? Any kind
Mhm.
of wind that comes around, any kind of storm, it's your plant is no matter how tall it goes above the ground, it's just going to get popped right out.
Mhm.
So I use that metaphor. I use a car metaphor. If you are not doing regular going to the gas station regularly or doing checking your oil or inflating the tires, if you're not doing all of those things on a regular basis, you're going to set up the car up for serious damage. And so taking care of what, all the things that your grandma told you to take care of is really, really important. And trying to think of, for me specifically, um, I have a history of difficulty with mental health, and I have it in my family. Um, and I, for part of my non-negotiables is also I see a therapist every week. Sometimes I go down to twice a month, but if things are going well, but pretty much every week I've set aside money and time for a therapist. I see a psychiatrist. I'm on antidepressants. I try not to drink a lot of alcohol. I try to manage my sleep. And exercise is a big one because any of those things, sleep, food, um, exercise, if I don't have those, my mental health goes way down very quickly. And then if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. So,
Mhm. The combo of exercise, sleep, and eating healthier diet, I didn't really get to start taking all of that seriously up until probably a year ago. And
mhm.
I used to struggle with a pretty bad anxiety disorder, and thank goodness I haven't dealt with that all this year. But even like there's a week where I don't get to exercise, I can start feeling it want to creep back in, and it's insane and just so interesting how those things can greatly impact you on the day to day and like needing to keep up with it and like maintaining that practice and like you said like making sure your car's getting its checkups and its tune-ups or whatever, like making sure you're on top of it, that way you can set yourself up for success.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very tempting to go all out with your friends or like on vacation, like when I went to Spain, to drink every day and just stay up really late. They don't eat dinner until like 10 o'clock. And then, but I can't keep up with that. I really can't. And sometimes I have to just be boring and say, okay, we have a big event coming on Friday. So I'm going to sleep all week. And then Friday I'll stay up because, we're going to the secret society cookout thing. And I just have to kind of be okay with disappointing some people. And if they're my people, then they're going to understand.
That's a really great point of, you need to learn how to prioritize your needs and, you know, hopefully the people around you understand and respect it. But if they don't, then maybe that's something to reassess and reflect of why is that relationship in your life or not.
Yes, absolutely. That's huge. And it's wonderful that you're getting this wisdom so early in your life. Um, there's a classic quote by Larry David, who's the writer from Seinfeld, and he had Curb Your Enthusiasm, but he said, if you think you're depressed, look around and make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. Like, like if that's the case, then you're probably not depressed. You're just surrounded by the wrong people, you
Yeah.
know? And your experience, I mean, the people around you can make or break your experience. So yeah, you at a certain point you're going to have to choose who you disappoint and be okay with it.
It it takes courage if you, especially if you've been in a place where, you know, you people please and need validation, and just to start implementing the like sorry but no, like learning how to say no or to put boundaries. Man, that was really hard for me, especially like if within the past few years. That was super hard, just learning how to just put my foot down. And but I'm so grateful now I've gotten to a place where it's kind of like a take it or leave it. Like if you vibe with it, cool, but if you don't, like that's okay, but maybe I'm not the person for you and you're not the person for me.
Absolutely. There's a great book by therapist Terry Cole called Boundary Boss,
Mm.
and I've been rereading it recently, and I love the way that she talks about, I mean, there's boundaries in every aspect of like codependency and people pleasing and um, just seeking external validation. There are all these things, and she provides actual scripts that you can say to people, and to just be firm and precise and state what you want. And you know, you can't, if you don't ask for it, you can't get it. So it's worth asking for. We don't all have to be these perfect people pleasing women, especially, you know.
Mm-hmm. So what's the average range that you work with for kids? Is it more middle school, elementary, or are you now working with high schoolers?
No, right now I work, I have one school and it's TK to sixth grade. And so I have worked with, you know, age 3 to 22. Um, and I'm able to work with all ages as long as it's educationally relevant within my private practice. But yeah, I've done it all. I've preschool all the way up to adult transition programs where students um, with a disability, or I should say, you know, neurodivergence, are going to a school where they're learning like vocational training and how to ride the bus and how to wash dishes and live alone and things like that. So, and I've worked at court schools. I've worked with um, Spanish speaking only population. I've worked with um, high SES and low SES and everything in between. Um, so a pretty good, I've been in it for 13 years. So I've seen a lot.
Mm-hmm.
California, a lot of California.
Right. What are some things? I guess maybe this question is more for like parents listening, or maybe people my age that soon will be parents, or eventually will be parents. What are maybe some things that, in your experience, you've worked with parents of the kids that you work with, of like how can they better be available for their child or help set them up for success?
I think the number one thing is to model health for themselves. I think that above and beyond anything else, if they are modeling healthy practices, physical, mental, emotional, um, communicative, even, you know, practices, and taking care of themselves, then their child will learn to take care of themselves as well. And um, not, you know, working on their own trauma and reactivity is really important. Um, I mean, the kids, they will learn to read, they will learn to write and learn math and all of that. But it's really the coping skills, like we talked about before, and also um, just knowing that you're loved and worthy. That's huge. That
Mm-hmm.
alone will give you, you know, 10 to 20 IQ points right there. Um, just knowing that you are just being held, that physical affection. There have been studies where, you know, children who are held in infancy score much higher on IQ tests and academic achievement than any other intervention. just being held, at age 0 to 5 more often. Having more books in the house is associated um, with higher scores in reading and achievement. And that's not to say that the books alone, just being there, are going to work, but
Right.
those who tend to read to their children, spend time with their children, also tend to have more books in their home. And it could be any language, it doesn't matter. Um, I think having compassion for yourself and for your children, I think is huge. And um, not necessarily parenting the way that you were parented or your parents parented when you were a child. Taking a look at what that really looked like. Like, for example, for me, my parents are immigrants. They're from Ukraine, from former Soviet Union. And there was a lot of yelling at my house. My dad was very volatile. There was definitely undiagnosed depression, perhaps more. Um, we walked on eggshells. I remember a lot of crying, throughout my childhood, and a lot of I love my mom to death, but a lot of enabling on her part as well, and people pleasing. And um, for me, I can see in my parenting sometimes my parents coming through, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's dad. Dial it back. And I tell my kids, I'm like, I'm sorry, I did not react appropriately. That was not a good call on my part. No one deserves to be yelled at like that. And so I'm so sorry. I am actively working on that. Thank you for understanding and having compassion for me. And I will, if I'm triggered somehow, or I feel like I'm channeling my parents' bad responses, nobody's perfect. I certainly am not. I may be, a behavior expert, but when it comes to your own family, your own house, it's very difficult to be objective and just use the tools that you have without getting emotional about it. So I try, but I do try to redo in my head um, anything that I did not do. So this is a great strategy from sports psychology. A lot of athletes are using this the guided or the visualization of what you want to have happen instead. And I think it was maybe Arnold Palmer that used it, most famously. But redoing your errors as successes in your mind, because your brain believes that whatever you're seeing, you're imagining, it's actually happening. And so the more you're practicing the error, the more likely you're gonna perform the error over and over and over. So if I yelled at my kid and I'm up late, that night thinking about how I yelled at my kid, I'm practicing that again. And if I am redoing it the way I should have done it, or I shouldn't say should, the way I would have liked to handle it better, then I am practicing that now instead. And so I am setting myself up for a success for the next time around in that situation for me to handle it better. There's a famous quote by Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist, I believe psychologist, not psychiatrist, but I could be wrong. Holocaust survivor. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about between stimulus and response, there is a pause. And in that pause is our humanity. And so we have the ability to choose how to respond in that pause. And we can make that pause longer and longer through things like meditation and visualization, dealing with our trauma and putting ourselves in a resilience zone. I can talk more about that, but there are ways to achieve that where you are not so reactive.
Mhm.
And so that was a very long-winded response to.
No, that was no, thank you. Yeah, I that was all really interesting. Um, since you just brought up the resilience zone, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so there is a psychological theory called polyvagal theory, and it's basically around the idea that there is a zone of resilience in which we are our best selves, and our central nervous system is relaxed. We can learn, we can achieve at high levels, and we feel our best selves. And so that middle zone is that, where we're relaxed and at ease, we're safe, we're not in our trauma, and we can think and problem solve effectively. We can access our, what I call for students, I call it my upstairs brain. So we have the front of our brain is what makes us human. It's the prefrontal cortex. So that is where planning, problem solving, organization, visualization, reliving the past, thinking about the future, all of those things that make us human and different from animals resides in the prefrontal cortex. So when you are in the resilient zone, you can access that prefrontal cortex. If you are if you're above or below that, your nervous system is out of the resilience zone. And so you may be high stress, or you may be, I forget the term for it, but it's basically like low energy, depression. There's like low arousal,
Mm.
hypo arousal, hyper arousal, more than needed. So anxiety would be up here. And then there's the resilience zone, and then there's depression,
Mhm.
basically. And so if you're, and it parallels anxiety to the future and the past also. So anxiety is fear of the future. Depression is fear of or reliving of the past. And in the middle, the resilience zone is the present. So you are present. You're fully immersed in the sensory experience of the moment. So anyway, with polyvagal theory, there are ways. So it's based on the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in your body. And the theory is that if you are able to tone the nerve, or like kind of like a muscle, build a muscle, practice it often, your vagal tone will be better, and you will be able to bounce back more easily.
Mm.
And so um, if you are feeling restless, anxious, agitated, what we call in psychology aroused, you are not in the resilience zone. And so you're not able to, learn, grow, problem solve, think effectively. And also the more you practice getting outside of the resilience zone, the more you're going to be outside the resilience zone. The converse of that is that if you practice being in the resilience zone, then it's more likely that you can return to that zone more easily. And so things that tone your vagus nerve rather, are things that we think of as coping skills. So breathing deeply, movement, yoga, adequate sleep, love, affection, also things like nasal, that om sound, like the
Mm.
nasal stimulation that happens when we do certain sounds, like the om sound, and things like havening. So if you cross your arms and rub your shoulders, that's called havening, and it
Mhm.
can actually stimulate oxytocin, which is the hormone associated with relaxation and bonding. It's what's secreted when infants nurse to create the bonding, but it's the hormone of, love and bonding and relaxation. And so all of those things tone the vagus nerve and allow you to bounce back more easily.
Wow, I've never heard of the resilience zone and kind of the more in depth with the vagus nerve and all that. That was really interesting. And so, remind me again, what do you call the
Havening.
havening? Interesting. I haven't even heard of that before either.
Yeah, there's certain things that um, kind of the things that we would think to do for babies, the shh and the rocking and all the things that we do to soothe little kids are basically the things that help soothe us now. They're ingrained in the human experience as, soothing experiences. So,
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really fascinating. Are there any other topics or theories or ideas that you would like to share with listeners?
oh gosh, I could go on. um, I would love to hear a little bit about you said that you're interested in psychology and positive psychology. I would
Mm-hmm.
love to hear a little bit about your journey and what your next steps are.
Yeah, so for context, I got my bachelor's in film, so directing and screenwriting. I,
Ooh.
yeah, I just like you, I've always been kind of played the therapist of whether it was like friends and family, strangers. I've just always been the person that people go to. And I think it's because I've always just been a good listener and I try my best to just take a step back out of my head and just listen instead of thinking what's the next thing I'm going to say. And so there's always been an intrigue of the way people work, the mind, and just psychology. But with the pandemic, I graduated 2020. So obviously there's no film jobs available or ready for me. And I had kind of my existential crisis, my quarter life crisis of like, okay, what the hell am I going to do? I have a film degree that has no open doors. I literally don't know what I can do. But I knew I like projects, I like podcasts, and so I figured maybe I can eventually start a podcast. And around the time with the pandemic, I finally went to therapy for the first time.
Mhm.
And it definitely changed my life. I didn't realize how important it was. And from there, I thought, well, let me make a podcast on mental health and wellness. And hopefully, I can share whatever I've been learning with people that want to listen. And,
Mhm.
surprisingly, I've gotten very good feedback from a lot of people sharing how it's been cathartic for the people that have been as a guest or people listening. And that made my switch of, okay, maybe I want to pursue my master's in psychology. And so originally I was thinking more the clinical route, like let me be a licensed family therapist. But I realized I get too attached. I'm very empathetic. I just know myself that I would get burnt out. And was trying to look into, okay, well, I want to help people, but how can I do that with still being good to myself? And actually, my dad was the one that introduced me to positive psychology, and I was reading more into it. I really love the proactive, preventative side of it. Like, let's focus on your strengths, let's focus on what you have going on that's working, and really hone into that. And so now my next steps is hopefully next year I can start my grad programs. So I'm looking at schools, trying to see what makes sense.
Yeah.
But the long-term goal now would be to open up a winery slash wellness retreat in Slow and Paso. That is the long-term goal because I used to work at a winery, so I love the industry
Awesome.
already.
Okay. Yeah.
So I now want to create a space where you can go to wine country. You don't have to drink, of course, if you don't drink, but like you can be in a nice, peaceful, relaxing setting, but at a retreat, whether it's yoga, sound baths, like therapy, you have access to coaches and all that. So that is now the direction I'm heading towards.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Um, and so with grad programs, what kind of grad programs are you looking at?
So I love University of Penn because they're the ones that kind of really honed in with positive psychology. So I love also the idea that it's a hybrid. You can still be working professional, but you go once a month in person on a weekend. So I really like that. Um, on a more financial route, ASU, they have a good online program that is very affordable. So I'm considering that. But then I'm also looking into maybe doing an MBA in entrepreneurship. So try to do a dual master's. So we'll see. But also Claremont because it's really close by to where I live. But hopefully with scholarships and all that, something can be more doable. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just kind of open now, just looking at different programs, seeing like, okay, what makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you know of any, please send them my way.
Well, within psychology, there are a lot of routes that they don't really tell you about. Like I had no idea that school psych was a thing. And um, for me, I had applied to an MFT program. I didn't get in. I was 21, and I'm really glad I didn't get in. They made the right call because I was very naive and not ready for that. But also, I was worried about how much it would burn me out. And honestly, um, they were probably. I mean, I was right. I think. Uh, I think having a nice mix of therapy, you know, um, clinical assessment, behavioral intervention, um, and systems level management. Like I have all of those things in psychology, in school psychology. I'm a, I'm basically like a social worker, a an MFT, a clinical psych, um, like a mental health director, and like a coach for special education teachers. And so um, it really is a nice mix if you have any interest in working with, younger population, or you can also work with high school and adult. Um, for the MFT route, it's like for any kind of therapist route, like there's MFT, there's LCSW, so clinical social worker. There is, in some states, they do a licensed professional counselor. Um, and there's also, if you wanted to do um, like a PsyD, to be a psychotherapist at that level, there are lots of options if you want to be in the mental health field. Um, you don't necessarily have to do therapy. That's kind of what we see a lot, but you you could go more for like systems management, or maybe like a social work perspective might be more your speed because even though it's still, it's probably half therapy and half like systems,
Mm-hmm.
um, where you're managing cases and things like that. There's also opportunities for like big companies, like Mind Matters, where they're doing like film contests about suicide, that you might be interested in getting involved somehow
Mm-hmm.
with something like that. Um, and then there's, um, yeah, I don't know. I know that the U Penn positive psychology, the master's in applied positive psychology, is very well regarded, and I think that it's it has a lot of really big wigs like Seligman,
Right.
behind it. So leaders in the positive psychology field, but also I don't know what you can do with it when you come out, and not to say that I just don't know enough.
Right, 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 yeah.
Um, whether you can sit for a test or not, and if you may not want to. But just thinking about what you can do at a master's level, um, coming out with that. I have seen some people come out with like digital courses and things like that for
Mm-hmm.
applied positive psychology. Um, but I think it's really a matter of like what you think you want to get out of it, you know, your outcome, and then also what's doable for you right
Right.
now, like what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah, this switch for like this career switch is still pretty new and fresh. So I just really like the idea of the whole proactiveness of it. And I think now since I kind of have a better idea, like I don't necessarily want to be a therapist, but perhaps even like a life coach where it's a little bit more flexible, more applicable. And I do see myself opening and starting a business. So in some regard where it can be related to mental health. So that's where I'm like, positive psychology, want to learn more on that focus. And then, with an MBA where I can learn how to do entrepreneurship, I can combine that. So we're still figuring it out, but that's just kind of the game plan.
Yeah. There's also a place called the Flourishing Center, and they do a certificate in applied positive psychology.
Oh, okay.
And so the woman who heads it, I think it's Amelia Zhivotovsky. She has some Russian name like me. Yeah, something like that. But it's the Flourishing Center, and she went through the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology, and created this center for learning positive psychology tools in everyday life, but also part of it is a certification for kind of like a life coach
Oh, very cool.
person. So that might be an intermediate step for you.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely going to look into that. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want me to cover?
No, I think well, again, thank you for taking time out of your Sunday with me. I think we
For sure.
touched on really good stuff. I learned a lot, especially the whole resilience zone. All of that I had never heard before. So I thank you.
Yeah. And I'm by no means an expert of polyvagal theory, so take it with a grain of salt, asterisk. Please look it up for yourself, polyvagal theory, and also it's the Community Resiliency Model, CRM, by Elaine Miller Cadas, or Cadas Miller, I can't remember which, but I'm hoping to go through her programming in the future. But a lot of the somatic therapies are based on her information, and the polyvagal theory. And yeah, somatic therapy is really coming into its own. So being more in the body, especially the work of Bessel van der Kolk. The Body Keeps the Score is his book. It came out a while ago, probably 30, 40 years ago. But
I'm reading it right now.
are you? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really popular right now. It's gaining more popularity, and we're seeing more of a body approach. And I just started with a somatic therapist actually myself, because I have a lot of chronic like pain, and I think that might be the key. I've been in therapy for over 10 years, and I think that at this point I'm past the cognitive behavioral part of it, and I really need to deal with like the trauma that's like my body's holding. And so it's been an interesting. I've just had a month of sessions with her, but yeah,
Man,
very, very promising.
I would definitely love to hear more about that eventually. Yeah.
You bet. You bet.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Miriam. I really appreciate learning more about psychology and the industry from you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and what you do know and just having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And actually, I didn't even plug my newest business. I'm so sorry.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Please plug yourself in.
So I'm starting a nonprofit called the Association for the Well-Being of Educators. It's AWE, and it's at you can find me on awesomeeducators.org, or you can go to my website, my main website, mindfulmiri, mindfulmiri.com, and find a link to Awesome Educators there. You can also see my offerings in terms of yoga and stress relief and parent coaching on that website as well. But I'm very excited for my new project, supporting teachers, supporting the well-being of teachers so that they're not burning out.
That's amazing. Yeah, because that's so important. And we lose sight, especially with like their therapists or psychologists, they're taking care of everybody, but then who's taking care of them? So same thing with teachers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
it was such a pleasure speaking with
no.
you.
Yes, likewise. I'm going to include all your links in the bio. That way, people listening, you can easily find all her information, social media's website, and all of that.
Okay, beautiful.
Perfect. Well, thanks, guys, for tuning to this episode, and we'll see you next week.